Hello and welcome to our Knights of the Roundtable Service Catalog Series webinar. My name is Tabitha Ishman and I'm the Marketing Manager of Excalibur Data Systems. So this mini-series is everything that you need to know about the Service Catalog. Our session 1 was focused on building the Service Catalog, while our session today is going to be focused on the evolution of the Service Catalog. Our final session is going to be held on September 16th, and it's going to be more focused on the analytics of the Service Catalog. So today, two of our customers, Nick from IU Health and Steve from Atlantic Health, will engage and speak about their service catalogs while explaining their wins and challenges with the process. Just a few reminders, this is an interactive webinar, which allows you to ask questions and to share ideas. So please don't hesitate to drop questions in the chat window. And the follow-up recording will be sent out this Monday, August 26th. We're really excited to welcome you all into our customer Cherwell community and hear your engagement with the product and solution. For the past 21 years that Excalibur Data Systems has been in business, we've provided a high level of service that's allowed our clients to achieve success through the strategic use of information technology solutions that solve business problems. We are a boutique integrator specializing in ITIL-based ITSM platforms. And our services include, they're listed out here, process design, implementation, automation, maturity assessment, strategy and road mapping, ongoing consulting, staff augmentation, training, integrations, self-service portal design, BRM solutions, analytics and dashboards, and customized solutions. We also have a lot of long-term strategic partners that we work with to achieve the best outcome according to your business needs and your budget and your timeline. So our partners are Cherwell, Bomgar, CG4 Asset Tracking, Comaround, Device42, Firescope, Celertis, Talent, and Fixstream. We do have two headquarters, one in St. John, New Brunswick, Canada, and the other in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And if you have any additional questions, you can go ahead and email info@excaliburdata.com. And like I said earlier, our last session of this mini series is going to be held on September 16th, and that's again going to be at 2 p.m. Eastern, and it's going to be focused on the analytics of the service catalog, and those invites are going to be sent out shortly. I'd like to introduce our moderator for the rest of the webinar, which is Robert Goguen, the president of Excalibur Data Systems Canada.
Thank you, Tabitha. Thanks everybody for joining on our webinar, part of the Service Catalog series. We're really excited today to have a couple of amazing speakers with us to continue our discussion about the Service Catalog, the evolution of Service Catalog. And like Tabitha was saying, in the very first session, we discussed about design considerations when going into building out a service catalog and what that looks like. And in this session, we're going to be talking about analyzing how to evolve, tips and tricks, and how to take it beyond out of the box as a service catalog and what value added there. Our two speakers today, we're very, very blessed to have a couple of really awesome attendees. We have, of course, Nick returning. He was in our very first service catalog session. Nick currently is with Indiana University, and he has a lot of Indiana University Health. Sorry, he has a lot of experience in this space. Prior to working with IU Health, he served as the IT service manager, leading help desk, executive support. He's been involved with GIS divisions. He's been with different areas of government. He has a very diverse background, especially in this space. And he's been working professionally as a developer, as an administrator at Cherwell for the last 4 years. And also with us today, we have Steve Castellana. Steve Castellana is a system analyst at Atlantic Health. Steve has over 20 years in IT, and he's been professionally working with Cherwell as an admin for 6 years now. Steve has been featured as a speaker at the global conference, and as well in the upcoming CLEAR conference in Nashville, Nick will be a speaker there. So we have a couple of conference celebrities, so to speak, with us today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it off to Nick, and we'll start to go through and talk about and have the guys talk about their journey in the service catalog space, continuing on what we talked about prior to. In addition to that, they're going to bless us with showing us some of the changes they've made in their system to help better support their service catalog efforts as well. And they're going to give us some tips, some tricks, some best practices, and how to keep you on the right track when it comes to the evolution of your service catalog. So, Nick, without further ado, sir.
All right. Well, thank you, Rob, for that great introduction. It's certainly my pleasure to be with everybody again today to continue this discussion. It's a fantastic topic, and one that I seem to continue to revisit over the course of my career. And I'm so glad that Steve's able to join me today because Steve, in his work, has really inspired everything that I've been able to do with Cherwell in the realm of service catalog design. It was one of his conference presentations that I first saw that really inspired me to make the improvements that my organization was really needing in the service catalog space. So what I wanted to do is just talk about, we talked about setting up service catalogs. So let's say you've had a service catalog in place for a little while, and you need to know, you start to get the sense that maybe it needs to change. So what we're going to do is try to show you some of the things that we can do there. So I'm going to start up a little thing. So, the evolution of the service catalog is feeding into your continuous improvement cycle. So you look at it and you understand, is it doing everything we need it to do? And if it's not, then we start to make some changes to it. Some of the questions that we like to ask in looking at the service catalog that may have been built is, are all the classifications used? If they're not used, if they're not valued by the customer, maybe they're not necessary. Which ones are used the most? Which ones are used the least? In some cases, if we might notice that there's a particular listing being used the most or at a significantly higher volume, but it's become a catch-all for many different things, and it may be necessary for us to reevaluate whether or not that might be broken up to better represent the various things that folks are using it for. And also, if anything's not being used at all, maybe those are items that need to be retired out of the service catalog. So there's any number of questions that we can ask. These are sort of metric-based, but you can also ask your customers sort of qualitatively. Does the service are you able to navigate the service catalog? Is it intuitively presenting the things that you face as a user, the things that you need to get from your IT service agency? So I'm going to go through one of my experiences sort of in this vein. When we first went live, my first sort of service catalog experience, we created 5 services that represent all of the things that our IT organization did. And of those 5, one of them was called end user support. And as you can imagine, this became the service that was just used for everything, because everything is end user support. We came to understand after a while. And so we realized that that's too generic, and everything seemed to fall under that, which made analysis and targeted improvements very difficult because we couldn't really break that down. We were limited in how we broke that down. But we also start to realize that end user support is told from an internal voice, an IT speak, and that's not really how our customers understand what they need and how they select what they need. So this was sort of our starting point in understanding a service catalog where everything was just this one thing and we needed to break it up. So what we needed to do is to break that up in a sense, And this is where we want to first highlight some best practice recommendations. So when you have a service like end user support, and you feel like you might want to break that up into some different groupings, perhaps, and what we did was broke it up into something like hardware support service versus software support services, which are logically distinct and we feel recognizable by the customers. We didn't just change the name of that service. We retired it out and added new services that represented those new things we wanted our customers to select. And we created a whole new sort of catalog section for those new items. And the reason we don't just rename it or delete it and start over with new services is because that presents a continuity issue for reporting and analysis in the system. But we also recognize that in doing that, Cherwell doesn't necessarily come out of the box with the parts and pieces that are necessary to facilitate that type of action. So let me switch over to show you Cherwell. So hopefully you can see my screen here. You know, what I'm showing is just the catalog or the category table within Cherwell, and we have a way to identify items that should be visible to our customers and should be visible within our larger classification internally. And by unchecking these, we essentially inactivate this particular listing. It can no longer be selected. In our environment, this is how we manage whether or not something is, a listing is active. And we simply use a binary active or inactive. I think that Steve here can jump in and talk about something a little bit different that he's done to achieve kind of the same ends, where there's a life cycle associated with his categories and subcategories. You want to jump in here, Steve?
Yeah. Thanks, Nick. So hello, everyone. Tabitha, could you switch? There we go. Thanks. Let me know if you can see my screen.
You see it?
I'm just going to pick anything.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect, great. So I just picked from our subcategory table. We initially did start with a binary. Is it active? Yes or no. And then we had the need for just like 3 statuses, right? And this is the type of the generic statuses that we almost put on just about every single business object. Planning, right? Is it active? And that's other functionality may kick in, or is it retired? We already had a whole bunch of functionality built on our active flag, the checkbox. So changing something to anything other than active will trigger that active flag to get kicked off. But this helps us with other future reporting. And as I find any functionality that's leaning on this checkbox, I pull it out and start going to this status, this new status field. So again, accomplishing the same thing. It was an evolution. We started with a checkbox and we decided to move to a drop-down value, which gives us a lot more flexibility of different areas of what we want to do with our table values for whether they're our service. Well, service already has a status, but categories or subcategories.
And the other piece that we wanted to mention in terms of recommended best practices, and this may be important in your environment, is presenting something potentially differently on the portal, in different language on your customer-facing portal versus internal to the environment. So both representations can be of the same request type or classification, but you might present them differently to the customer, one using technician speak and one using customer speak. And that can be an important consideration at all levels of your classification and how that's presented.
Yeah, Nick, I could give an example actually right here. So here's the classic service category and subcategory, and this is how we had it broken down. But customers don't speak hardware. Hardware? What is that? So we created these portal-facing alias values for the similar structure. As you can see, it's 3 tiers. So this is what the service would be. So hardware is actually related to the customer speak would be computer equipment, and the other 2 we kept the same. They were easy. But this gives us flexibility to change these aliases that are customer facing, but all core functionality in the system is still actually relying on these values, whether it's reporting, whether there's expressions, the things that are expression driven or within your one step, or obviously your searches. It all still leans on these core values here, but this is what we can advertise out.
Yeah. So they're effectively alternate labels for your customers.
Yes. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah.
And you see down here, I should have pointed this out earlier too. But we have another checkbox. Is this available in portal? Yes or no. So, out of all of our active classifications, only a subset of those are actually available to portal. And if they are available to portal, then it starts to use these for display within the portal. But when tickets get created, it'll be created with these values here.
Yeah. So those are just a couple of examples, again, of some of the structural modifications that you might use to help ease the transition of changes in your service catalog and make your service catalog more user-friendly, both to your technicians and as well as to your customers. So, Tabitha, if you want to switch back to me, I'll kind of pick up where we left off here. So the next thing I wanted to kind of talk about in our discussion is sort of the opposite, where we talked previously about classification or your service catalog being too generalized. We have a situation that I'm currently working through where we have what we believe is a service catalog that is too specific and creates just too many options for anybody to reasonably deal with. And that presents a lot of sort of inverse type problems that we might have from the other situation, whereas the customers have a very difficult time navigating through something that is so vast a catalog. This is I'm showing what I'm hopefully showing is a profile of our environment, and even back in November we recognized this and tried to pare it down. And right now, today, we have a little bit more than 1,800 unique classifications of incident and service requests in our environment. And about 750 of those are available in our customer portal. And even at 750, that's quite a lot. And we hear a lot of feedback from our customers that it's just too difficult to navigate. They don't know what to select. There's a lot of ambiguity. There's a lot of overlap. And it's like going to a restaurant and seeing a menu with 750 items. It's not quite sure what it is that we want to have there. It's you kind of gloss over and lose sight of what it is you're after at some point. So one of the things that we've tried to approach is sort of a root cause analysis, and why do we have this situation? Why is our service catalog so difficult to navigate? We believe it's because there's too many items. And we went through this little 5 why exercise to try to figure that out. And this may be, an analysis that you guys undertake in your own environments for specific issues or, more of a general service catalog problem like this. So we tried to figure out that, ultimately, why we have so many is because we list individual applications and systems as categories, essentially the level 2 of the 3-tier classification system. And in doing so, we're a large organization and we have just an ever-changing listing of options. So it necessarily results that we have a boatload of selections in there. And furthermore, they're always changing. So administratively, it's a very high burden on our team where we're constantly adding and removing and changing classifications within our service catalog. And we just don't feel like we should be doing that. But the reason why many organizations start out this way, and both the organizations that I've been doing this with have experienced it in the same way, is Cherwell doesn't, sort of out of the box, doesn't do a classification or an assignment of issues except by subcategory. So when you look at a subcategory listing, like what Steve showed, or like what I'm showing on the screen here, it has a default team, and this is the team that's assigned on selection. And default team assignment is a fantastic thing, but relying on something where a specific team is associated with a specific application presents a problem as you try to build out a dynamic assignment. So if that is the root cause of why we have to create so many individual listings, then we chose to try to address that and correct that in our system. So this is those other modifications, those other structural modifications we mentioned earlier. Those are little field adds, little minor things that you can use. The way we address a problem like this is through quite a larger structural modification. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this particular modification and how it's used to compress the service catalog without sacrificing the specificity. And I'll caveat here by saying this is completely inspired by Steve in terms of anything that I've done and my experience with this. So all credit to Steve. But basically, what we're going to do is utilize the system profile in the asset management database within Cherwell, the configuration management database, and utilize this to drive the specificity of your service catalog. So we're asking for service category and subcategory, but in many ways we're also asking the technicians to identify the CI, the configuration item that is at fault or at issue, or that we're making requests against. And if we can build out a profile of who supports that application, we can then begin to define a default routing in the same way that we do for a subcategory. So, and then we can define a subcategory variable like Steve showed on his, where there's any number of variables that you might use, where we can say, for this particular classification of subcategory, we want to engage that system-based routing. Rather than using a default team on the subcategory, we can utilize the system assignment or system support profile in conjunction with the category to drive the assignment. So turning it on the subcategory selection level, which is what's selected from the portal, having that feed in through the assignment of the system. So a quick expression modification within the ownership assignment. And then you have a situation like this, where the intake of a ticket is generalized at the service category subcategory level. So in our environment, we're going to create something probably along the lines of, I have a software support service, and we're going to categorize that in a couple of more generic ways. So rather than this being Cherwell as the category, we're going to say it's a non-clinical application distinct from a clinical application in our healthcare environment. And I want to report an issue. And then also I'm going to provide the detail of that as Cherwell at the CI level rather than the category level. So the service desk may take a call like my first example here. The customer may select on the portal in a similar way, and they would just get a prompt to specify the clinic or the non-clinical application that they're having an issue with. And I want to, when you do this, if you can create something like this that utilizes the lifecycle management power of the CMDB with an understanding of your catalog as a representation of the things that your customers can request of you, then you're able to really keep your service catalog, what I like to say, compressed down to the things that you provide, but allow for the comings and goings of various applications and systems without having an impact on your overall catalog design. So the way this looks, or the way this will look hopefully soon in our environment, is right now we have 164 categories of business applications and 214 categories of clinical applications. Again, because they're named applications at the category level. And that's a potential 378 variations of I've got a problem with this software. And into this, if we engage this new system-based routing selection, what we end up having is two variations of report an issue with software. I'm having an issue with my clinical software, and I'm having an issue with my non-clinical software. So from a service catalog standpoint, we've done quite a lot of work in about 30 minutes. I built this framework in about 30 minutes in our application, in our environment here, and create the potential to compress down almost 400 redundant catalogs. And this doesn't even get to account management, where I have 150 variations on reset my password, please. So these are some of the structural modifications that we would talk about in terms of keeping your catalog true to a classification that facilitates analysis at a reasonable level, and allowing the asset management database to drive some of the specificity and metrics around individual systems and applications. So, stopping here for input from Steve.
Yeah, Nick, I love the like your numbers there. Just with this isolated, just focusing on software, right? You have, potentially 378 variations of just incidents where we're reporting an issue, right? There's other classifications that you have, but just focused on just this area, you had 378, and now you're looking at potentially a max of 2. That's great for the customer. That's great for your help desk if they're getting a call from the customer. They only have to look for 2 type of records as opposed to sift through 378 variations.
Now, I will say, you bring up a good point in mentioning the help desk, because the help desk has, when you transition your service catalog like this, there's a couple of different options that you can take. So I could expose these new services to the customer, but still leave those variations for the internal technicians. So adding a new service and not necessarily retiring these old ones. Or the other option is to retire this out and have the simpler variation, but it does require a significant change in how the service desk approaches their recording of an issue, in the recording of a ticket. So right now, when the customer reports something, they're looking for those very specific terms that drive the very detailed classification that we currently use. Whereas in the new scenario, the proposed scenario, the service desk has to change the mindset to be much more generalized in terms of recording, and focus therefore on accurately specifying a configuration item. All right.
Yeah, at the end of the day, this is just a tool. It's still something culturally has to always change, but it's always for the better when they're both in sync.
And that's right. And I would say that we also sort of harken back to the analysis, and we talked a lot about in service catalog setup last time about what is how do you understand the services you provide, but also how do you evaluate and analyze those. And to some extent, the leadership in the organization is wanting to understand how well we're supporting the software applications in our environment. And they don't necessarily care at a great level about all the different detailed applications. They just want to know that we provide software support services, and how well are we doing at that. So your catalog is in some ways driving or you're providing and speaking to the level of analysis that your leadership needs to facilitate the continuous improvement efforts that are necessary. And if the analysis is diffused across 400 potential listings, some of that targeted analysis may become harder to get at, or the improvement areas don't jump out as quickly as they might otherwise when it's spread across such a large catalog.
Right, it starts getting fragmented.
So, Steve, you do something
I can
similar
show,
to this. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to show the what we're again. It's very. We had a similar business need, and I could share the solution that we put into play. So I'll start from a ticket because I think it's easier to digest. And here's, our wonderful service category and subcategory. And, you can drill down in the drop downs if you want to, and you have this quick search. So we'll just say, we'll just start with computer, new. What did I pick before? Press new desktop. Great. And we have a specific form, but don't worry about that. So you can see it stops at subcategory. We have 3 tiers here. There's no need for anything else. They found what they needed by doing a search instead of drilling down. So one thing I want to speak to before I dive into the ticket routing is something that was extremely valuable, and it was hidden in plain sight. And I don't know the name of the out-of-the-box field. Might be keywords. I don't remember. But any field that you choose to index, add to your full text index within the business object, will then be searchable by those related item pickers. So we could add other aliases for this subcategory with that the customer may use, or just even shortcut codes for our help desk. Right? Maybe they want to call this issue 39 for whatever reason. I don't know. We can put that in, except we'll spell it right, of course. And if they've used that related item picker, it would then find this classification. So something that was huge was aliases. Right? They're not. Yes, all these other fields are indexed as well, but this field takes it to a whole new level of. Really, it just opens up the floor to do whatever you need to do if you're doing a search based to get to that classification. Not the best for reporting on, but the purpose isn't for reporting. The purpose is to how else can we quickly get people to this information, specifically our help desk. They're not presented with a portal. Yeah. So the other thing. With that, sorry. Go back into that. The thing that I also wanted to share with that those aliases is that we decided to add service aliases and category aliases that are inherited from the drop downs that you select. So if we had an alias for our in the service record, because I picked hardware as the service here, it would then auto-populate whatever aliases we wanted to put there. So a good example, for us healthcare folks, electronic medical records. That's long to type in, so you could put in EMR. That's one of our services is electronic medical records, but an alias that we put into that service is EMR. It cascades down to the category and the subcategory table, so EMR will now would be available in a service, and the category then has its own aliases, and then the subcategory has the aliases that, because I'm in the subcategory record, that's where I'm allowed to type it in. It inherits the other things from its parents. Huge. It just opened up the doors for all sorts of just quick wins, and it's table driven. We're not hard coding anything. A little bit of a build up front, but it always pays dividends in the end. What do you do, Nick? You said you're doing something similar with the aliases, or?
Yeah, we actually have keywords. So we have various keywords that we use that are full text search. So when the technicians are trying to find and translate the customer's language into a particular classification, we'll put in any number of keywords in those in the subcategory level to say, like for example, in the Cherwell listing, you could type in blue pill, I think, and get Cherwell in the search for classifications.
Right. Yep. Yeah. So it just opens up the door for that's cool. So I did want to share aliases because not everyone is aware of, and I think the actual out of the box field is called keywords. I could be wrong. I don't remember. It's been about. We started with version 4.6, so I don't know what's out of the box anymore. So back to the classification, like the routing with using where in parallel to what Nick is using, where he has the system record. We too are making use of our CMDB for routing, but we actually have an intermediate table in between, and there's this application table. So again, I'll search. Maybe this is a Cherwell ticket that's coming in. here's our fourth tier right here for applications, and maybe somebody has a cool idea maybe for Cherwell. Now our fourth tier appears for the application of Cherwell. It's not our CI record though. Just think of it as just a relationship to our CI record. The CI record is actually down here, which we did just for fun. We're not using the CI related picker, so we're not going directly to the CI. This is a new table called application table. That's what I should show is the actual app table. Very similar to subcategory, it's just a fourth tier now. I don't want to get too much into the weeds of how it's built, but this was an evolution of almost 6 years now. What application, and that's where it's actually picked when we build this from our CMDB, pick an application from our CMDB for this classification. The reason why we needed this, the business need, was we have different functions are performed by different teams for different applications. There's no one golden bullet. We don't have one team that performs everything for user management. There's a good volume that goes to a specific team, but not every single access request goes to the same team. Not every single ticket goes to the same team for a specific application either. So we just needed to matrix it out, and we did not want to throw applications in category or subcategory or in service. The applications come and go, your services don't. So you can see this table also allows us to have a default escalation team, and that's the pecking order. If the classification on the ticket stops at subcategory, there's no fourth tier. It'll use the team from the subcategory table, and if the classification selected uses that fourth tier, which in our case it's this application table, it'll use the default team there if there is one. Otherwise, it'll still use the subcategory. We can have the same thing with specifics. There's a pecking order. If this is the specifics to use for this record. Something else that we added also, we did this about a year ago. Another way for a team is that specific could drive the team. So there's a form. You have your specific form. What was it before? New computer. So we have this field, AHS support location, and this is something that's available on the portal. And these are the values that the customer sees, right? They pick something that they need to see. Well, this is still a table. Behind the scenes, this table is mapped to the specific team that supports that site. So if the classification is checked off to say use the team in the specific, the ticket will inherit that team and override it. It doesn't matter what the classification is. It says this is the team to send it to because we have local site support folks. And it was picked by the customer. It all, again, you're seeing a pattern here. Everything's hinged off the classification, and then the functionality goes from there.
That's right. I think, Steve, the thing that I like about this, and the thing that really inspired me when I first saw your approach to this, was that we really felt like we wanted to maintain a structural integrity to our service catalog. We feel confident that named applications shouldn't be a part of what we know as classification. And we talked about that as a general rule at our last session. But the question starts to become, well, I need to be able to dynamically sort of route these things and make sort of dynamic decisions around, what needs to happen with with a particular support request or incident. But it doesn't necessarily change fundamentally what it's classified as. There's just lots of details that can be included that may drive different assignment decisions. So I think that what I see here is a way to make those decisions based on answers in a specific form or configuration of an application's support structure without fundamentally changing the services that you provide or the classifications that are necessary to build a catalog, a customer-facing catalog. To me, it keeps your catalog and what the customers select reasonably small and digestible to the customer, but allows you to do a lot of very robust, dynamic assignments and questionnaires with your specific forms.
Right, exactly, it does. And one of the things that we're always trying to look at is if we can put it on the portal, how can we get it to the team that's going to fulfill it? It's by default, it'll always go to the help desk. That's the safety net. But how do we keep things away from the help desk if they're not the ones that are actually going to be performing it? We don't want them to just be a routing station or a transfer station that a human eye is going to read. So what else so we're constantly reviewing of what else do we need to build? How else can we build things so that it could take care of that routing? And the customer doesn't even realize they're making the decision of which team it goes to.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We didn't give them a choice, like pick your team. We put it in their speed, pick your location, your support location. We're still letting them know what's your support location. We thought that was important. That drop down doesn't reflect all of the sites that we have, but it reflects the. I didn't come up with a decision for all this for why that list was picked, but it's definitely a smaller subset because we didn't want to give them pick 300 locations, but they're picking the team. It's great. Shifting. It's a small step left. While it may not be knowledge, it's a small step getting resolution or fulfillment a little bit faster. Instead of it going to a centralized help desk team to then read the ticket, find out where this customer is located, and then route the ticket. Maybe it only takes them 10 minutes to do that. Hey, that's 10 minutes lost.
That's right.
Add that up over every time that happens.
So Cherwell gives us, out of the box, I think, the power to route based on a selection. So your default team, like we showed earlier, and that gets you so far, but you start to begin to think about, well, there's limitations to that, and how can we overcome those limitations without turning our service catalog into something that is just overwhelmingly large to account for all the variations. And what Steve's got here is a way to overcome that limitation. And I think it's fantastic. Rob, do we want to open it up to questions at this point? We got about 15 minutes left. Or do you want to have any other questions for us as a moderator?
Yeah, we did have a question that did come in around the service catalog, and the question was when you're doing the viewable on the portal, do you ever use the reverse, where you're showing something to the users of the portal, but not on the client side or the technician side? And I guess in that situation, it would depend on the use case. If you have a service catalog option available to the users, but it's not viewable to the technician, what are the use cases in that time, like for that particular example? And one of those use cases might be an automated workflow for a service request that you might be able to, through the portal in itself, resolve the service request without it ever needing to go to the technician side. But generally speaking, as a best practice, you probably would never have a situation where you have an option in the service classification on the portal that would not be seen or viewable on the other end. But I do want to point something out that brings up an interesting fact about that question. For a lot of organizations, we have internal classifications in the service catalog, and then we have classifications that are also exposed to the end user. Case in point, you may have a security incident or an infrastructure request or incident that would not necessarily come from the customer itself, but it would be an internal reference internally within your organization from one IT group to the other. And so those classifications are not often exposed on the portal side. But when you run into the use case of a managed service provider, everything changes. So if your organization is a managed service provider where your customers are, let's say you're the help desk for 20, 50, 40, 60 customers, and everyone has a different service catalog, or everyone maybe or subscribes to various services as a managed service provider. For example, I offer 20 services, but they may only be subscribed to a certain number of services. We have seen the situation in that case where we build subscriber-based service catalogs where customers can be linked to a service, a category, and a subcategory, so that when they go into the portal, they're only actually exposed to their customer-specific service catalog. And so you would manage a large master service catalog on your end as the provider of the service, and then those customers can subscribe right down to the subcategory level. So if you subscribe to this service, but only certain categories within that service you're subscribed to, and only certain subcategories within those categories you're subscribed to, you could have a very dynamic, driven service subscription-based service catalog to offer services to your customer, where account managers can oversee what services that they're actually subscribing to. And so when they go into the portal, their portal experience is the service catalog that's presented to them is that of only the services they actually subscribe to. So that's another example of a different spin on the service catalog approach, where depending on your industry vertical, depending on the use case, you may be taking a subscriber-based service catalog, or you could be in a traditional one-on-one relationship with the IT customer, and it's just a straight-out service catalog for exposure. One other example of this is limiting service catalogs based on which group you are with inside the organization. Because enterprise service management has become such the forefront, especially in the Cherwell space, bringing in people like facilities and HR and the PMO office and many other facets of an organization, those things may drive different service catalog entries or exposure based on what group is actually interfacing. So we have a couple of customers that have, we'll say, a multi-tenant situation where HR uses their environment as well as IT, as well as maybe 2 or 3 other groups, and they have their own sort of workflow from that perspective, where they have their own ticket, they have their own view into a ticket, and you would use views, and you can use other techniques in order to bring multi-tenancy in place, where those service catalogs are exposed based on, you know, if I log into the HR portal versus the facilities portal versus the IT portal, and now we get into that enterprise service management drive. But when we look at some of the things that Nick and Steve have evolved into, you'll see that out of the box gets you your first step, but there's so much more you can do with the service catalog based on the fact that it can drive, you know, support routing. It can drive SLAs. We have customers who have SLAs down to the subcategory level. It can drive a number of different factors to create a better workflow from a process perspective, but it also drives and outputs incredible analytics that you can better understand how you're doing the work you're doing, how your business is processing the service requests and the incidents that come in on the service delivery side, and allow you to make management decisions based on that feedback that's coming in out of the analytical data. And so it's really important when you're analyzing the effectiveness of your service catalog that you're able to go back in, you're able to see what's being used, what isn't being used. Am I getting enough granular detail? I wish I knew this, I wish I knew that. And that's when you're going to employ changes to your service catalog. Always remembering, don't delete. It's better to retire services, as well as putting in, like what Nick did, visible classification at the category or subcategory level, or even what Steve did by putting in an actual status of a category or subcategory so they can retire statuses or subcategories, where you can maintain that for historical purposes. And being a relational database, you shouldn't make changes to the wording of the existing catalog items. You should introduce new ones and cycle out old ones. And those are some of the capabilities to further enhance that out of the box that gets you started, that's just your first step in your evolution. But all of these additional things that you've seen today by Nick and Steve are all techniques that a lot of customers are employing in order to really harness the power of the service catalog, and it's the glue that kind of keeps everything together.
Hey, Rob, I wanted to speak to something on the question that came through on the chat. To flip, can we flip it where something's in the portal but not available to the technicians? And actually, that's something that we're exploring, and I can give you a business case for that. Right now, if the classification is something that's available on the portal, we're just flashing this classification is available on the portal. This is just the foundation for us to start getting the muscle memory, because our help desk should be guiding the customer to the portal. In some cases, not in all. The ask is that if something is requested for certain classifications, it has to go through the portal. So we're not going to allow certain classifications that, even though you can pick it and select it, you won't be able to create a record from in the client if it's something that strictly has to come from the portal. It'll be viewable, but we can't, and so that is something that we are looking into working on right now.
So I just implemented that exact thing in large scale last week in our environment.
Cool.
So we have a specific type of request. It's really our access management service where we engaged it in Cherwell. And Tabitha, if you want to switch over the presenter to me. So we had a system that facilitated this that was a separate system, and we just incorporated it into Cherwell. And in order to control the intake, we said that you have to request this on your own behalf. You have to request this for yourself. So in order to control that, we said you can only request these types of things over the portal. So this entire service in my classification is strictly a portal only. So when I look at these listings in here for whatever this might be, it's only available to the portal. It's called active. We just changed the label on it. But none of these are ever visible to classification. I simply can't have a service desk technician entering this ticket. And the reason for that is because we've defined very strict protocols around what's happening with this thing. So it has to come in, and it's going to immediately be held waiting on the requester's manager. So I can't have a team dealing with it and doing any sort of discretionary assignment or anything when there's a very, very strict workflow that's going to happen.
Right.
And I'm going to wait for the manager's approval, and then I'm going to give it to this team specified. And so
that's very interesting. Those are some fantastic use cases of driving portal adoption. Recently, I was having a conversation with one of our customers, and they did something absolutely incredible. What they did was they deprecated the ability to submit a ticket via email. I know everyone's going, gasping, going, are you kidding me? And the only way you can submit a ticket is through the portal, and they basically force their hand in that everyone has to use the portal, leverage the portal, that self-service, that pre-classification, et cetera, et cetera. So it's an incredible step forward. There's a lot of companies that would just be, we could never make that work here. But that's
I'll tell you, Rob.
Yep.
We did that too, and what we found in our analysis was that email sourced tickets were incredibly problematic because we could not enforce a structured intake. We were not, and because they weren't calling, we didn't have the opportunity to ask questions. So we would have an email come in that would automatically generate a ticket, and it said computer broke in the subject line of the ticket, and in the body it would say please help. And that necessarily resulted in all kinds of additional back and forth and questions to be asked, and it just became a very expensive type of ticket just because it came in over an email. And if we,
that's their use case too. That was exactly what they said, was that there's so much chasing things down all the time that it just became very difficult to manage, so it just made sense to do that. Now, not to cut you off, we're running out of time. I want to open the floor to people who want to have the opportunity to ask questions. If there's anyone out there that does have a question that wants to ask a question of either Nick or Steve, let us know, and we'll give you the floor. You can ask those questions. Tabitha, I think you're going to have to, I'm not sure how you do that, open it up, or I think there's a button. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, it's on the right-hand side. I'm waiting to see if there's any questions come in.
Looks like we don't have any questions.
Yeah, we haven't had anything come in yet.
Okay. Well, I'll say that one of the other things that we have the opportunity to use, and we've done this a little bit. I'll give this example really quickly in a way that you can address this. So I have a routing in our service catalog here in our portal only section where you might need to request some sort of ODBC access, right? And the question is, well, which ODBC environment do you want to access? Do you want development, production stage, or test? Well, I only expose this one, and then we utilize this thing called a service catalog action to run, and we actually prompt the user through the selection of this. So if this listing is something that leads to one of the others that's much more specific and has a defined workflow around it. So it's a way for us to expose one listing to the customer, but facilitate a potential for 4 separate individual selections with their own workflow and protocols. So that service catalog action to run is sort of a component that could be used to help improve the available, what's exposed to the customer and facilitate a structured selection.
Very cool.
Awesome.
Oh, and the other thing that I wanted to say was, to Rob's point about enterprise service management, we're doing that now too. So these listings are all information services service area, but we're onboarding separate areas like corporate real estate that has their own service catalog, and those users essentially only see their catalog. So when they open up Cherwell, they effectively see a system that looks like it's custom built for them that doesn't have any ties to IT at all.
And it's, Nick, we're doing the same thing. We have a couple other non-IT teams in Cherwell that have their own instance. It's important to note a lesson that we learned from that is we built our own HR ticketing before there was an HR map, and we went down the route of let's build an HR service table, service table in the HR category, the HR subcategory. Horrible. I smacked myself on that. We just used the same tables that we had that it's already built out in incidents. So as an administrator, I could build functionality all in one set of tables, as opposed to, well, here's everything I have to redo everything in the HR and the facilities and the accounts payable. That's just wanted to share the lesson learned there. As we went down the road of having their own classification tables, and with less than 6 months, we pulled out of that and built similar functionality here. Where I forget the name of the field we have, but you're grouping it's your tier before service.
Mm-hmm.
Really, you're grouping your services.
Awesome. Yeah. So if there's no more questions, we're out of time. Tabitha, if you just wanted to close it out, and our next session, the date, and kind of how we can close out this 3-part series.
Yeah, so thank you again, Nick and Steve, for joining us today and giving this awesome presentation with so much information for us. So thank you guys for that. And then, like I said earlier, our last session of the series is going to be about the analytics of the service catalog, and that's going to be on September 16th at 2 p.m. Eastern. So I'm going to be sending out those invitations early next week, and so you can just check your emails for those and register. So thank you guys for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Steve and Rob and Tabitha, for letting us come and share these experiences.
Thank you. I hope everyone has a great day.
All right, bye-bye.